the big deal is AI actually exasperates the biases of humans. It sort of amplifies the biases. Interesting use cases that we have heard recently is for using AI for crime detection. And for those of us who have watched Minority Report, that's a scary thought, right?
Welcome to AI to Z. Hosted by Airswift's Chief Revenue Officer, Anna Frazzetto, we delve into artificial intelligence, health tech, and more. Tune in and journey with us into the future.
Hello. Today on our show, we have Swathi Young as our guest. She is a management consultant and CTO at Allwyn Corporation, which is a digital services organization with clients in transportation, healthcare, and federal sectors. Swathi has a proven track record of driving growth, efficiencies, and innovation through results-oriented data architectures and AI, which obviously I love for us to be able to talk about. Also, Swathi, as a CTO advisor at Sustain Chain, a public service platform that accelerates advancement within the sustainability ecosystem. And your mission is to enable organizations to harness the power of AI for positive impact and social good. So welcome to the show. Also, I want to give you a big congratulations of your recent achievement of getting your MBA. I know that happened. Yeah. So congrats.
It. Yes, that was a arduous 22-month program, but very intense. But I came out on the other side with a lot of knowledge and applicable, insights from the program itself.
Excellent. Well, let's talk a little bit about, you have such a variety of background, and what fascinated me was your early work with AI focused on truly inspiring mission, helping cancer patients. So if you can share some of those projects and how AI is making a positive difference in cancer care today, that is remarkable.
Thank you, Anna. And yes, that was an exciting project. And this was a couple of years back, I want to say at least 4 or 5 years back, before we heard the buzzword of AI after ChatGPT. But this was traditional machine learning projects that I had the good fortune of working with on lung cancer research. So it's a research activity we were doing for a lung cancer surgeon. And some of the insights we found were very, very helpful. So a couple of use cases that I worked on, I want to say is one, the government always keeps track of any cancer surgery patients, if they are inside the hospital, if there is a readmission after the surgery, the government actually keeps track of, I think it's for any surgery, but also impacts lung cancer surgery. And after a point of time, if you exceed a certain percentage of readmissions, the government can penalize you. So that was one use case we worked on to see what are some causes for readmission among lung cancer patients. And we used historical data, found patterns using machine learning, found like top 10 causes of other, if they have like comorbidities of other diseases and correlationships, we found that was a cause. So that was very impactful for lung cancer patient outcomes. The another one use case that I worked on, which was super interesting, was actually there was a hypothesis by the surgeon that the adipose and the visceral fat tissues embedded in L3 vertebrae adversely impacts lung cancer surgery recovery patients. So essentially, it's not just your BMI, but some visceral fat in your L3 vertebrae. So what they were traditionally doing was taking the CT scans and actually measuring that visceral fat manually by a radiologist. We were able to automate that using a vision machine learning algorithm, and that was very helpful for the surgeon to understand how it impacts the recovery for a lung cancer surgery patient. So these were actual use cases I worked on, but there are other multiple use cases, especially in healthcare, of using machine learning. I think two things that I've heard and read research papers on is how to improve actually detection of breast cancer in women of color, because traditionally, women of color have had more false positives while doing a mammogram. So it was augmented using machine learning to reduce the false positives. And the other third one, which also has a lot of published research and practical use cases, is finding out the diabetic retinopathy in the eye, and how, before they can even have advanced impact to the eyesight, machine learning could be used to detect early signs of the disease of the eye as well. So there are a lot of other use cases in pharmaceuticals, etc. But personally, I worked on the lung cancer use cases, and needless to say, AI helps accelerate and help improve patient outcomes.
Oh, and I'll tell you, I feel like every time, I have a conversation about what's happening in the AI space, like we're living in such a fortunate time, part of me, I'm grateful that we're here, today to be able to experience this. But I also wonder what the future is going to look like, 50 years from now and, 100 years from now. Like I think of, the Jetsons that we are going to be so advanced, and it really is remarkable. You're right. Impact of AI in particular in the healthcare industry has been astronomical. We all hear about amazing AI prototypes, but how do you bridge the gap and turn them into real world solutions that companies can use? Maybe, walk us through the fascinating journey of taking an AI project from a glimmer of an idea to something that delivers, real value?
No, that's a very good question, and in fact, that is one topic I've been often asked to speak on. Just published my YouTube video of the conference talk I gave from taking an AI project from prototype to production. So I want to say there are multiple steps to consider in order to make that happen. I want to boil it down to 5 steps just to simplify, because there are a lot of things that you have to consider. But if you can categorize into 5 main steps, firstly, start with the business problem that you're trying to solve. And often, I think this is where organizations are either challenged or have an issue, because somebody, and these days, it is the buzzword of the day. Truly, every 3 seconds you hear somebody say AI, right? But so some people or organizations might embark on their AI project immediately, right? Oh, let's improve the HR process, or let's improve the recruitment, and immediately go heads down. Instead, I want to say, take a step back and focus on exactly the problem that is aligned to your business goals, or if you're a federal sector, to the agency goals, right? If you can align that, that is where you will get the best use case of AI, because it is a powerful tool, but you have to be very thoughtful and about the use case that you want to pick. So make sure you pick the use case. And as an addendum of that statement is, sometimes people are lost to know what use cases to pick. They don't know really, right? What is the capability? What are some use cases? So this is where people like me can be really helpful. I call myself a technology storyteller, because I come in and say, hey, if you are a federal organization like an IRS, and your job is to collect taxes from people, I'm sure there's a lot of fraudulent activities in taxes. One good use case of AI that is proven to be successful in financial institutions is fraud detection. Maybe you can consider that. Secondly, if you have like a lot of unstructured data, which is basically handwritten notes and things like that, and you want to actually find some insights out of it, that is that is another good use case for AI. So also, if you're in a particular industry sector, like you are a manufacturing company and you manufacture goods actually compared to software services or services, you have very good use cases of using machine learning, predictive analytics for inventory management, for improving your manufacturing process. So if you don't know where to start, you can engage and see with SMEs of AI and ML who have worked in multiple industry sectors and say, hey, these are some use cases to consider and the capabilities of AI ML, and then brainstorm ideas around, okay, how can you map it back to your business or organizational goals? So that is the first step. The second step is do a high level assessment of where you are as an organization in terms of capabilities. And these capabilities can be twofold. One is whether you have the people who can actually build these applications. Most organizations are not still at that level. And this is where you can engage a company like an Allwyn Corporation or someone else who will bring in the experts who can implement and also strategize this along with your organization. Another innovative way of thinking is if you really don't have the budget to engage a third party consulting organization or even bring in or hire new talent, you can actually leverage the talent that is in the universities around you. So one interesting thing about the lung cancer project we did was we collaborated with George Mason University, which is basically in the backyard, like DC has a lot of universities. So we were fortunate to collaborate with them and bring in a capstone project to do a part of the research. So collaborate with the universities close to you, at least to start the pilot project. And the second part of it is do an assessment of your organizational infrastructure. If you're a cloud organization already, that would be really helpful because cloud will enable you to spin up compute at your fingertips. And the fourth point I want to make is essentially think of other considerations, right? We talk a lot about responsible AI. I've done a lot of work on ethical AI principles. So think of those things. How will there be bias and fairness, especially where you have to be very, very cognizant about use cases where there is criminal justice involved, where it has potential to go to a court of law. Those things you have to be more careful, and also compliance, right? Healthcare and financial institutions are regulated. So you want to make sure you build responsible AI and around the responsible AI principles. And lastly, the fifth one I want to say is make sure you check the box for the privacy and security of. And so any AI, whether it's generative AI, large language model, or traditional machine learning, uses data. So make sure your data is anonymized and obfuscated with all the personal details removed before you feed it into your algorithms. So those are some five things, simplifying it, but some category of things to consider.
No, that's great, Swathi. And I think the one thing that you hit, which I thought was fascinating, was tapping into the universities. I really like that idea, and it's not something that companies normally think of. So yeah. I think that's a great nugget for the audience to take away. Let's talk a little bit about generative AI. You kind of were talking about that as you were going through the 5 items, but it's exploded in popularity as we were talking about. But often it gets linked to like deep fakes, right? So let's kind of move past the hype, and maybe you can share some exciting ways how generative AI is being used for positive applications, right? Pushing boundaries of what's possible, being able to do more with less.
Absolutely. So there are I want to say 2 major use cases of generative AI. The first one is putting the power of a chat GPT like app in the hands of a consumer. So today, anybody above the age of 5 can literally use chat GPT. And I think that is where the tipping point of AI has come in. They literally put the power of AI in the hands of a consumer. So I am a power user of generative AI. So I use all the LLM applications, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Mistral, Claude, everything. So the first thing is, I think people who have not yet used it have to use it. I highly suggest you use it. You can start playing. You can start with being playful, like write a poem for my teacher if you're a student, or write headlines for my blog, or digest the daily news. At least ChatGPT is able to take things from the internet, not all other generative AI. So the first thing is the consumer based use case. The second one is for organizations. For organizations, truly there is a large potential and power in using generative AI. But again, I think people are still embarking on the journey right now to use the generative AI and trying to understand, to your point, what gives the biggest bang for the buck, right? So for the first time in history, you have large language models and there are APIs that you can leverage. So if you are a financial organization, you don't need to build your large language model. You can use the power of the APIs, which is, think of it as the plumbing that can directly connect you to the large language model of, say, a chat GPT. The way it is different from a consumer app is that if you're a financial organization, you would not use it like the front end consumer is using. You're plugging into the back end of the large language model, and then you can use your proprietary data within your organization of large language models and feed it to the large language model. So this could be data like logs. This could be data like handwritten notes. It could be a lot of different data. And truly you can leverage the power of large language model for somebody who's sitting at a front desk, say they're doing wealth management, right? And they are going to go to high net worth individuals and sell some products. So using this large language model, if I'm a new employee of this financial organization and I want to sell something to a large net worth individual, I don't need to spend so much time searching for all my organization's products or all the organization's marketing material, the product portfolio, and things like that. So your large language model, if implemented correctly, could help a new employee in the financial organization and say, hey, recommend, based on this high net worth individual, recommend these 3 products to them, and they would give the recommendation. Now, where the human's intelligence will come is, yes, the large language model has recommended these 3, but what can we offer beyond that, right? And augment it. Okay, there is something happening in the news today. Nvidia has hit $1 trillion. So although we are recommending these 3 products, you can augment your intelligence with what is happening, bring more context and say, okay, we are recommending these 3 products, but in today's day and age, we are recommending some hardware companies, or we are recommending Nvidia in the next month or so, that it's going to hit the market cap and so on. So it's going to increase the productivity of the employees, but at the same time not take away their jobs. You are reducing the time that you're trying to get information, trying to collate all the necessary materials together, so that the ChatGPT can do for you if you implement in the organization large language model, and then you can bring your intelligence, context, your experience, and present a highly personalized product to that high net worth individual if you're a wealth management firm. So essentially, I'm demystifying the fact that people are afraid that it would take away your jobs. Like for me, I use it on a daily basis. I use it sometimes on an hourly basis. It's like, yes, it is giving me some information, but where I add value is based on my experience of 20 years in technology. I augment with my experience and then make my presentation as part of my job. So that is where I think the human in the loop, or what we say our intelligence, is going to be increased by reducing the burden. Think of it as a personalized assistant for you. That's a great use case.
Right, right. And Swati, I love the way how you explain it, because I think the one thing that you really drive home is the fact that it's there to make you more productive and more efficient, but it doesn't mean that you're going to get lazy and comfortable, because it's going to require you to, interpret the information and provide that human analysis, as you put it. So that's a great way, I think, for the audience to really appreciate what you've just said. I'd like to kind of switch the conversation a little bit and talk about, diversity and inclusion. They're essential for responsible AI development, right? So how can we ensure that AI doesn't perpetuate biases, or that it really benefits everyone? Maybe you can share a little bit about that.
No, that's a great question. And it's a very, very important topic for every business leader to consider, think about, because diversity and inclusion is no longer a checkbox. It adversely impacts everyone. Whether it is gender, whether it's ethnicity, it's everyone, right? And if you do not consider it, you're leaving money on the table, because whatever product you're selling or services you're selling, you want everybody to be in the market for your product or services. So if you're eliminating certain sectors, you're leaving money on the table. I think of it that way, right? There is a financial return on investment if you think and consider diversity and inclusion. For AI, you're right. It actually, a lot of people are like, humans are biased, and what's the big deal? AI will be biased. The big deal is AI actually exasperates the biases of humans. It sort of amplifies the biases. So yes, interesting use cases that we have heard recently is for using AI for crime detection. And for those of us who have watched Minority Report, that's a scary thought, right? So why is it scary? Let's think for a minute, right? So if there are certain zip codes, we all know, if you're in DC, New York, Philadelphia, avoid these areas, whether it is daytime or nighttime. And we know certain zip codes have high propensity of crime rates, right? And it is a reality. Now, if you're going to take that information and give it to an AI algorithm and say, now predict the crime that is going to happen in the next 1 hour, 24 hours, it is going to predict in the same areas, or maybe it was even going to predict the same type of people who have perpetuated the crimes. And this is where we already know humans are biased against certain zip codes, a certain type of people. Now it's going to amplify and exasperate that, right? And think if a judge is using an algorithm in a criminal code of law, and two people are coming and it's making a recommendation whether it's a bailable offense or not, and based on some historical patterns and based on ethnicity, it would always recommend certain ethnic groups to be always criminalized, not given bail and things like that, right? So you have to be very, very careful. Another use case I want to bring out is something I discussed a while back with somebody in the federal sector. She brought out a very good point, like, sometimes the biases are by omission. So suppose we are talking about healthcare and we are saying, okay, let's collect all the information about mammograms in certain areas and zip codes in US. And maybe there is a particular location, I'm just throwing fictionally, in Midwest, that we don't get the data, and we proceed with our algorithms. We have to stop and think why we did not get the data. By omission, also, you're introducing bias. So once you stop and think and reach out and say why this zip code or this locations we didn't get, it could be because they didn't have access to healthcare. And that's an important data point, that even lack of data is telling you something. So those are the type of things. And as a technologist, often people love to write code and algorithms, and I'm guilty of that. I want to say this is where the technologists have to raise their heads, bring diverse perspectives to the table, and say, okay, we can easily write our algorithms omitting the data from these locations, but why is the data not available, right? It's important to question and think about it and see, okay, what story does that convey? And by omitting, are we biased against those people whom we are not including in the algorithm? So in order to address your question about diversity and inclusion, it's also important. I'm a huge proponent and advocate of women in technology, women in AI. And the reason is the more diverse people who write algorithms bring diverse perspectives to the table, right? So if we are bringing also all the genders, all the ethnicities, there is a lot of questions that would come to the table. And if you've heard of Dr. Joy Bolamani, she has done immense research in, it started off in MIT Media Lab, where she saw that the machine learning algorithms of vision is not able to recognize dark skins unless she literally put a physical mask made of white paint. That is when she was recognized, right? So there is all these biases that we can question and bring to bear and create algorithms that are holistic and for everybody in humanity. So while I started this conversation saying there is a return on investment, but it's also for the human good for everyone.
Right. And Swathi, you brought up, I think, another relevant and key point. The fact of omission tells a story, right? So I think that's another thing that's a good takeaway for our audience, because doing the deeper dive as to why the data is being omitted, which kind of leads me to my last question. And it has to do, with governments establishing ethical frameworks for AI. It's a critical task. So what are the biggest considerations when building such a framework? Can you elaborate on some essential principles it should encompass to ensure that the AI development happens with, transparency and accountability? I mean,
Yes.
It's a big ask, I know, but we have to start somewhere.
Right. And this goes back to my work on ethical AI framework that I helped develop for the US government, along with a lot more people in the industry and government leaders. So there are, I think, couple of considerations. Firstly, you have to think of bias. Bias comes in many forms, especially in the data, and bias from the lineage, which is basically the provenance. Where does the data originate? There's a lot of bias considerations. Number two is fairness. We spoke about that just a little bit ago, but definitely the fairness is impact. An outcome of your biased data could be fairness, right? You're adversely impacting. And we heard about use cases of algorithms in HR and recruitment. And because historically women have not had promotions as many as men, or women have not been in many industry sectors as men, it could, since it learns the foundation of any machine learning and AI model is it learns from historical patterns. It learns that women are not being promoted or not, and its output will be against women, not because it has any moral values, but it's because what it's seen observing in the historical pattern is that women have not been promoted. So its recommendation engine will learn off the 90% of data that men are getting promoted, and it would make a recommendation for the next man to get promoted, right? So that is an unfair recommendation against women. And some cities, I think New York has banned using algorithms in HR practices, but just an example of fairness. So that's the second. And third, you spoke about transparency. So in the world of AI, you also say of interpretability. So one of the interesting examples is that the Center for Medicare and Medicaid actually files they actually would take the claims filing of all the hospitals and doctor offices, and they actually see how much fraud is there, right? So they use statistical modeling to detect the fraud. And an interesting proof of concept I did a few years ago was involving why can't we use machine learning instead of statistical modeling. And one important consideration is if you are not paying the medical claims for a doctor saying because of fraudulent claims, the doctor can take you to a court of law, and there you have to prove that your statistical modeling principles you have applied. Why did you say that this was fraudulent, right? So we had to do the same using machine learning. So it's very important to have interpretability of the algorithm. So what does that mean? That means the inputs that go into making the recommendations, what is the weightage given to the inputs of that recommendation, have to be very clear to be presented in a court of law or even otherwise. So that is interpretability and transparency. And then the fourth point you said is accountability. Definitely responsible AI and accountability is important, because you have to document the use case, you have to document the parameters that go into the algorithm and the outcomes, and whom is it impacting the results, whom is it impacting, is it the end customer, and this goes back to taking accountability of products. So if a financial organization is actually using algorithms to make a recommendation whether your loan is getting approved or rejected, you have to be transparent about that, because you have to ensure that nobody is adversely impacted.
All right. Well, Swathi, that's been very, very helpful. And thank you so much for sharing so much. If you're to leave the audience with one power word, what would it be?
I have to think a little bit. Change. Embrace it.
I love that. Change. Thank you once again.
Of course. Thank you so much, Anna, for having me. And this was a wonderful conversation.
Thanks for joining us on the AI to Z podcast with Anna Frazzetto. If you found value in today's episode, consider following for more insightful STEM discussions. We'll be back with another deep dive. Until then.